Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our November meeting. Thank you for turning out on a not very pleasant night. As usual, I'll get the parish notices out of the way, starting with the usual ones, please. Turn your mobile phones to silent or off if you would, although you may not get a signal down here anyway. And if there were to be an alarm of some sort, we either exit through the door behind me with the green sign, or if it's safe to do so, out through the way you came in. Looking to forthcoming events, we're approaching, as far as meetings are concerned, of course, our Christmas break. The Christmas dinner cruise, which Mike Kay has organised on the Saturday the 14th of December, does still have some places available if you are interested. And if you are, follow the booking instructions in the last issue of the magazine. There are also places available on the tour we're going to do with FRM1, taking the vehicle back to its haunts at Croydon, actually on the anniversary of the day when it entered service there as a one-man bus. The provisional date we gave in the magazine has changed. It's not Sunday the 15th of December. It will take place on Sunday the 22nd of December, partly because that is the true anniversary of the entry into service of FRM1 at Croydon, but also we did manage to persuade the museum, who were a little bit doubtful that running the tour on what is the darkest night of the year and very close to Christmas is doable. So whereas they were pushing us to the date that was in the magazine, we've now got agreement that it will go on Sunday the 22nd. Places are still available. It will require a fairly early start from Acton, although picking up points between Acton and Croydon may well be possible. If you are interested, Susan has a list of names, and ask Susan at the end of this meeting to add your name to that list. The other events, which I haven't mentioned, are full. There are no places available on the pre-Christmas walk. We should have been doing the walk after the dinner, I argued, but actually we're doing the walk first and the dinner afterwards, which is not the healthy way round, is it? What Mike Kay has amusingly called the Highland Fling excursion to the west coast of Scotland in January is also fully booked. So don't try to book for those. We meet here again on the 20th of January. There's a sense of déjà vu about this because we were meant to have had this talk last year, but circumstances prevented that. And Christian Woolmar is coming here on the 20th of January to talk about the railways of the Indian Raj. I think that's it. Some of you, I noticed, were taking advantage, as I was, of the 30% discount in the shop at the moment. That lasts until Christmas Eve. If you wonder what's going on outside with the bizarre, actually tomorrow at 11 o'clock, principally but not exclusively for museum staff, there is a special sale of lines which are being discontinued. And friends are welcome to come to that. So if you want to have a quick peek as you go out to see whether there's anything that attracts you, you'll have to come back at 11 o'clock tomorrow to actually make the purchase. But there's some interesting stuff which, if it's what you want, are at very reasonable prices. Okay, that's enough from me by way of introduction, other than to say welcome to our speaker tonight, to David Humphrey. The title of the talk is there. It's a very modest title, I might suggest, because it only says he tried to run a bus company. Some might argue that he succeeded, I think. And it also says a bus company, whereas in fact he was involved in running lots of bus companies. So what I would regard as a modest title, but David has over 50 years' experience in a whole raft of public transport environments, particularly but not exclusively buses, and buses in both the original regulated environment, working under agreements with passenger transport executives, here in London, of course, with London United, where he led the management buyout of that company, and in commercial spheres as well. So a whole raft of expertise and recollection to share with us. David tells me that his presentation will last about 45 minutes. If we run to time, he has a little extra bit, which is about the current proposals for possibly franchising bus operations in the principal cities like Manchester. And I suspect we will do that, but we're going to just ask ourselves the question when he gets to the end of round one. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Barry, and good evening. Make sure that I can... Yep. Now, I was asked to do a presentation on my career, and I thought, that's boring. What I propose to do tonight is tell you some stories about the operation of buses. In fact, I had no ambition to make public transport my career. I'm always vaguely interested in where routes went and stuff, but nothing about the vehicles and all that sort of chassis scraping stuff. RM317, by the way, in case you were wondering. It's the most southerly route master in the world. It's on Tierra del Fuego. My first job was with City of Oxford Motor Services. Nothing to do with the City of Oxford. It wasn't a municipal. It's now called the Oxford Bus Company. Started as a clerk in the traffic office back in 1968. And that's when I started hearing stories about bus operation. My first traffic superintendent, George Dunlop, started as a conductor in Oxford in 1927 and told the story about how he managed to lose a wardrobe between Oxford and Bedford. This was the days when bus companies were common carriers. The luggage rack was on the roof. They put a wardrobe on the roof when it left Oxford. When it got to Bedford, the wardrobe had disappeared. They found out what happened. The bus had gone round a bend and the wardrobe had obeyed Newton's first laws of physics and carried straight on into a field where it ended up a pile of matchsticks. Oxford at the time, like many companies, was in a terrible state. Massive staff and vehicle shortages. I remember for about an hour and a half one morning, out of the 14 buses required to run a 5-minute service on the twos, there was one on the road. One bus every hour and 10 minutes, not great at all. On another occasion, I actually got on, all 14 were running, but I got on one of 6 going one way and the other 8 were going the other way, all in convoy. The traffic congestion in Oxford was terrible. Not a great time to enter the industry. Sharp-eyed people amongst you will realise that the destination is wrong. It's on the way to the station. Blackbird leaves it's where it's going to go on its way back. Must have been a warm day that day. A major restructuring of the services fixed the staff shortages. City services were extended out to outlying towns and villages like Oxford and Kidlington, and the previously completely overlapping country services were withdrawn. Massive reduction in requirements for both vehicles and staff. That fixed the problem, at least in the short term. I like that picture, don't you? It's lovely. I was struck by the difference in management styles. One type was the old school, who best illustrated by my being admonished for going up the stairs in front of the general manager. I kid you not, got to the top of the stairs and he said, "Humphrey, when I was a young man starting out in this industry, I would have instinctively held back and allowed my general manager to proceed up the stairs before me." Oh, yeah, right. Contrast that with Alan Price, the traffic manager, who was responsible for many other, the city and country services combination and loads of other stuff as well. Massive changes he drove through. And his attitude is best illustrated by a conversation I heard in the Gloucester Green canteen. An old country services conductor was having to go driving, and he was really, really worried about being able to get through the training and pass his test in the 2 weeks that up until that point was the limit by the company. And Larry Smith, the country rep, said to him, he said, "Now, don't worry," he said, "this bloke's not like the last bloke. They'll let you take as long as you like." And I thought, now that's how to manage people. Next port of call was Crosville, up on Merseyside. I was officially a management trainee. Great stuff. This picture is at the pier head, where loads of bus routes from Crosville came in, funneled and terminated, about 4 different garages involved. At the pier head, vehicle allocation was made on the basis very often of which bus the driver fancied driving. I kid you not, that actually happened to me. I also remember seeing typical Merseyside humour, an inspector's report reporting a driver on the top Prescott Road, warm day, front window wide open, driver stripped to the waist. Subject of report, failure to display PSV badge. One of the few pictures I took during my career, that's Crosville's last half-cab single-decker, SLB 290. Lovely bus to drive. One of the good things about being a management trainee, you got to do just about every job, or at least sit alongside people that were doing the job and learn how the whole company fitted together. Getting to play at being a driver and conductor was great fun. I also got to play at being a depot superintendent for a few weeks at Mould Depot, and that complete contrast. It was a lovely depot. They do absolutely anything for you. It had been left kind of moribund. It had 3 coaches. I started taking on private hire. Everything ran. So I took on some more and everything ran. So I started taking on express duplication and everything ran. So finally, I was the hero. I got a London dupe. It went round. Mr. Humphrey's got us to London. I was the hero. It was a great depot. That's a map of Crosville's operating territory. I guess most of you will realise that. Massive list of depots and outstations. We'll come back to outstations later on, but the purpose of this slide is to show the extent of the operating area and the fact that at the time I was put on a little working group of people who developed what became National Bus Company's operational costing for service by service. It sounds crazy now, but up until that point, bus companies knew exactly where the revenue was and where the mileage was, but had no idea what the costs were. You just got average costs, and if it was above that cost per mile, it was good, and if it was below, it was bad. Absolutely stupid. Working my way through that has held me in good stead throughout my career. I really got to know the dynamics, the financial dynamics of the bus companies. Doing something really helps you know your job. I moved to West Yorkshire, totally different company. It was very unusual. It was a bus company with a good reputation at the time. And it deservedly so. Everything ran most of the time. It was really good, and it was all down to the ethos generated by the senior management of the company. I'll illustrate that by saying that the general manager had started as a conductor in 1928 with the same company, ended up retiring as general manager. And that doesn't happen very much anymore. The whole management team regarded themselves as being on duty every bank holiday Monday in the summer. And they were needed. I got a call about 11 o'clock one morning at Harrogate bus station, and it was the deputy traffic manager phoning up from Leeds. David, how many spares you got on this afternoon? 10 or something like that. Oh, you'll need twice that number. We've been really busy. And he was right. We did. We had absolutely everything out of the garage running, duplicating stuff everywhere. It was massive fun, and it was really good to work for a company like that. There's a number of tales I could tell. We haven't got the time about what it was like to work for a really good company. It tried dial-a-ride. One of about 4 companies in the NBC in 72 or 3 tried dial-a-ride experiments. Lovely idea. The old ladies with their shopping bags, they loved it. It was door-to-door stuff. But like so many such attempts, the critical mass needed for the frequency and capacity to make the thing financially viable was bigger than the available market. And people who are trying similar things today, helped a lot by modern technology. We had a woman in the office with a telephone, and it was pretty basic stuff, or groundbreaking then, but breaking some basic stuff now. And they're still having trouble. Jennyfield, it's an estate in Harrogate. I like this story. It was being planned whilst I was there. And a planning officer from the district council came and said, we're going to have this brand new big housing estate. It was very big, about 2 kilometres by 1 kilometre. And they said, this is the plan. And it was cul-de-sac. You just couldn't run a bus through it. And I said, that won't work. What you need is a spine road. And bless them, that's what they built. And Jennyfield is now that runs on the spine road, is the most frequent local town service in Harrogate to this day. Now then, snow on the ground. I'm going to tell some snow stories. I was at Bristol in the late 70s and early 80s, and we had several quite bad snowstorms. snowstorms. And one in particular I remember. It was a Sunday morning, it was snowing, blowing across. You couldn't see the shops across the back from our house. I was phoning around the depots, finding out what's going on, because I was, amongst other things, the company spokesperson, so I had to tell Radio Bristol what wasn't running, and it was just about everything. Phone calls, first 4 buses out of Bath had just stuck as soon as they saw a hill. So I thought, this is crazy, it's a Sunday, we'll just stop. So I gave it out on the radio and decided that we wouldn't ask staff to come in. What's the point of struggling through all this lot just to sit in the canteen and go home when it's nearly time to go home? Unfortunately, the cold front that brought all that snow got about as far as Gloucester and was pushed south by a warm front. So the snow turned to rain. And then the rain stopped, and I looked out of my window at home at 6 o'clock, and there was nothing. It was just sort of slightly damp, and not a single bus. I felt terrible. I thought, I'm in for it. Monday morning, it's not going to be good. But my boss, Des Hodges, traffic manager at the time, he said, no, he says, you made a decision. Turned out wrong. Doesn't matter. You made a decision. 1 or 2 snowstorms later, we had the same thing, and I thought, I'm not doing that again. But a few days after the snow, I was chatting to John Wolfe, the Lawrence Hill Depot OMO rep, I think he was, and he said he lived out at Midsummer Norton, and he said, I was driving up from Midsummer Norton, and it was snowing. He said, I had Radio Bristol on, and I was listening, and I was like, Mr. Humphrey, tell me I can go home. Please, Mr. Humphrey, tell me I can go home. But no, I didn't tell him he could go home. Another little lovely story. I had a phone call from Bath Depot about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Had a bus on the Radstock stuck somewhere up on the Mendips, I don't know. And we're not going to get to him, at least until tomorrow. But it's all right. The driver's found somebody who'll put him up for the night, to bread and breakfast. Will the company pay? Yeah, of course we'll pay. A day or two later, front page of the Bristol Evening Post, snow stops the West Country, picture of the bus. And that's when I realised where he'd managed to find someone to put him up for the night. Yep, right outside a pub. I thought, that's my boy. That's where to get stuck. Another snow story. There's no snow on the ground, but we're going to lead into stories about outstations. And this is 2 outstations. The bus is run by Pateley Bridge Outstation, which was one of mine, and it's outside Grassington Outstation, which is the other side of the Mendips. And the number 28 was a market day service, twice a day, twice a week, Pateley Bridge, over the Pennines to Grassington and back. One Saturday afternoon, 4 o'clock or whatever time the bus was, the driver went across and it was snowing heavens high, and he thought, I'm never going to make it back. So he parked up in Grassington, he left the bus in Grassington, and showed the resourcefulness typical of outstation drivers. He phoned up the farm where he lived, got his brother to bring the family Land Rover across the Pennines to pick up him and the 2 passengers and take them back across to Pateley Bridge, leaving the bus nicely tucked up in Grassington Outstation to be recovered the next day or so. So on Monday morning I found out what had happened, and I realised that I had been responsible for the operation of a licensed bus service with an unlicensed driver, an unlicensed vehicle, and therefore no insurance. But we got the 2 ladies home, and the driver got home and all that. Ledbury was an outstation we had at Bristol, and again, the resourcefulness. I had a phone call from the superintendent at Gloucester. He said, sorry, Mr. Humphrey, leading driver at Ledbury's just come in to give us the bad news that the people that own the land where we park our buses wants us off. Oh dear. But it's okay, he said. He's found somewhere else we can park. He's found out who the owner is, and he found out how much the owner wants for us to park there. Oh, right. I'll pass you over to the accounts department then, shall I? Absolutely lovely. Come on, there we go. That's a slightly redundant photograph. It's still Ledbury, but it's a lovely photo, so I thought I'd show you that as well. Now, another outstation was Stockbridge. When I was at Hampshire Bus, we had to close it. I'll babble on while you have a little read of this. It had to close, and the drivers decided that they would put together a photograph album to record life in Stockbridge. And they presented me with a copy of the photograph album, and I've scanned all the photographs, and I've scanned all, included the text that accompanies every photograph. So this is as the drivers presented it to me, and I warn you now, there is grammatical incorrectness and a little bit of political incorrectness as well, but it's the 1980s and there were 3 blokes in an outstation. Without much commentary from me, I'll just scroll through and let you read. Yes, it's a pub. Post office is closed, but there's still a bus service, thanks to Hampshire County Council, God bless them. Now, note in the background there's a very steep hill. Buses coming from Winchester come along a road that comes over the downs, crests the hill, and then descends a very steep hill down into Stockbridge. Just lodge that in the back of your minds for a few more slides. Note the driver's shovel leaning up against his car. Fancy driving a Layla National down there. The Hampshire Downs can get quite cold in the winter. However, told you there was a bit of political incorrectness. Remember the hill, steep hill? Steve Knight, never known to run late, especially on the last run in. And there they are. Steve Barnett ended up, that's the guy in the shirt, ended up running Eastbourne Transport some years ago. Don't know what happened to him after that. From outstations and thoroughly reliable staff to urban operation. Really nitty-gritty stuff. I was Ribble's Merseyside area manager. I like the irony, don't you? The right to work on Merseyside. You know, they all work in Fords, probably. After a couple of days, settling in at Bootle, area manager, I thought, oh, I'll go out and have a ride round on some buses, see where they go. My first bus ride was on a 59 from Old Roan to Liverpool. I sat upstairs, everything seemed fine. Conductor was going around doing everything until 2 boys sitting opposite me. The fare was 40p. 10, no ticket. Thanks, lad. 10, no ticket. Thanks, lad. I thought, oh dear, oh dear. I really don't need this. I've only been here a couple of days, you know, so I had to do the business, suspend him from duty and names and addresses, all that stuff. And I thought, he'll punch me or something, you know. You know what he actually said? God, what a crap job you've got. At one depot, it was the same depot where the conductor was. It was absolutely awful. As the time went on, I found out just how awful. At this particular depot, let's name and shame Aintree Depot, almost all of the set-right ticket machines could be turned back so that the cash registers under-recorded what was printed on the ticket. Almost the whole depot. It was pretty bad. So there was a big conference. The traffic manager and the operations assistant traffic manager came down from Preston, and we were in the cash office at Aintree in the evening, talking all about it. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And a running sheet and a waybill plopped through the letterbox. Crew had just finished. So idle curiosity, what's this? Opened up the waybill, opened up the running sheet, and sure enough, they'd done 2 round trips, Ormskirk, Liverpool's, and it was just gone midnight. I looked at my watch, it was 5 to 10. Yeah, they'd missed a complete rounder. Sad story now. The PTE were in charge. All of Ribble's operation within Merseyside was as an agent operator to the passenger transport executive, and the PTE came up with this really wizzo idea that all of Ribble's routes in Crosby, maybe most of you don't know the geography, very large town to the north of Liverpool, all the routes came in and funneled all the way down, mostly down the Stanley Road into central Liverpool. The idea was that they would all terminate where they go into the funnel, where there was a railway station, and they'd all get off and get on the train into central London on the Southport to the Liverpool line, or transfer to other bus services. And it was just crazy. I think most of the people who were travelling past that point were only going another mile or so into the Litherland and Bootle. They weren't going all the way to Liverpool. All of Crosby was connected by local bus services that met every train anyway. They were all connected with every 15 minutes, bus services to every 50 minutes. It was a total stupid thing to do. Had great arguments. I found myself arguing with the PTE because it's the wrong thing to do, arguing with the union because I was having to tell them they were going to have a reduction in work, arguing with myself with a Ribble hat on saying this is probably not in the company's best interests. It wasn't much fun. One take on it is this. One of the drivers at Aintree was a cartoonist, and he ran a series of cartoons. This is just one of them. Probably at the back, you can't read at the bottom, so I should read it out. Forces of the glorious MPTE, Planners and Timetable Division, today caught and destroyed the last of the rebel buses, note the play on words, in the Crosby corridor. A spokesman for the unit said, now those Crosby sods will have to use the trains. Note that the driver's take was the effect on the travelling public, not the effect on the drivers or the workforce or anything else. I thought that was really quite good. And several others in the series were on the same theme. So from urban agency operation down to Hampshire, where I was traffic manager. Incidentally, yes, traffic manager doesn't mean outside of London what it means inside London. Traffic manager is now an archaic term. It's the equivalent of an operations director, commercial director. I hope you all understood that. Sorry, should have said that earlier. Hampshire Bus was created by the split up of one of the large regional companies, Hants and Dorset. It was certainly not inherently good bus territory. High car ownership. It was in the high end of the London commuter belt. All costs had been dealt with. It was 100% OMO. MAP, the market analysis project, had been completed, so the route network was rationalised. What do you do? Well, the first thing is redesign the livery. That's my livery, and I'm quite pleased with it. No, that's not what I did first. First thing, I dispensed with the old mileage-based fare scales. There were some were stupidly high and all that, so I got rid of all of that, tried to work towards some market-based fares, and told the world about it. And we started advertising. This is a little series of adverts. I put them all up because the cartoons are nice. The copy underneath is absolutely brilliant. There was a hard-bitten depot manager who said at the end of the series, he said, that's the best series of cartoons I've ever seen in the bus industry. And we put one of these in every free sheet throughout the whole of the company's territory. good, innit? Advertised extensively on TV. This was we advertised this. This was a contra deal with a load of retailers throughout the company's territory. If you had a freedom ticket type thing, you got discounts. So if you had a 1-week season ticket in Southampton, you got 5% off a local butcher's prices in Southampton. If you had an annual all-system freedom ticket, you got 25% off double glazing. So we had a wonderful little series of TV adverts. It was great. Produced a pack bespoke to every individual housing area throughout the whole of the company's territory. A timetable for that area, little area, fares leaflets, a voucher for a free journey on the bus, and a comic. The response from passengers was fantastic to all of this. Hampshire Bus was the first national bus company in the south of England to record an increase in passenger numbers. That's after several decades of decline. I was really quite pleased with that. It was working. The increase in patronage, of course, gave me the headroom to hold fares steady. So we told people, we're not going to put your fares up this year. And they said, oh, thank you, I'll ride the buses more often now. It's great. At the start, when Hampshire Bus was formed, it was 54th in the National Bus Company League table of profitability. By the time we had climbed to number 3, Martin Lewis, the engineer, said, David, this is mad. We're more profitable than Yorkshire Traction. And he was right. One of the earliest minibus operation introductions in the south. This was, in fact, new routes in Hythe. Had a big launch, Bewley Motor Museum, parade through the town and all of that. And there's a little tangential comment here. The service operated illegally, officially. We had actually applied for road service licenses under the old licensing regime just at the time when the transition to deregulation was about to take place. And there was an embargo on any changes to bus services for several months. We put the road service license application in time, but somewhere in the Traffic Commission office it went wrong and we weren't granted a license to operate. So I had this delightful conversation with the clerk to the traffic commissioners. What are we going to do about this? Scratch, scratch, scratch of heads. He said, well, you better just operate. He said, I'll make sure there are no traffic examiners around for the next fortnight. So I was officially allowed to operate illegally. Introduced another minibus conversion in Andover. We had a band of the Guards battalions marching the buses through the town. Oh, great fun, great fun. So, many of you will know that when I moved to London, I was an enthusiastic joiner of the minibus change in London. So we finally come to London. Dennis Darts. I was the first operator of Dennis Darts in London, almost the first operator of Dennis Darts in the country. Southampton City Transport beat me by 3 weeks. I was really annoyed with them. When they first introduced the Darts, they brought it up to 55 Broadway, and all sorts of people and worthies went out and had a look at this. And this is quite different. This isn't an extended van. This isn't a Renault or a Dodge. This is quite good. But I said to them, actually, chaps, there's one thing wrong with it. It's half a metre too long. And they said, what? It was 9 metres long. At the time, the London Buses minibus driver agreement was for Class 3 PSV badge holders. And Class 3 licenses were people limited to nothing longer than 27'6" in old money, which is 8.5 metres. So, God bless them, they went away and took a slice out the middle and compressed it and made it 8.5 metres, which is why there's a half bay. The other problem with Dennis Darts is that they were too expensive for Clive Hodgson. He didn't want to pay the 20% premium for a Dennis Dart over the Dodge and the Renault van conversions. But Clive, they'll last longer. Don't want to listen. They're more expensive. But they were, no, didn't want to hear about it. So there was a real problem. Dennis knew that I wanted them, and I had an order for 12 that I would desperately wanted to be authorised to sign. So the board came to see me. I had the chairman, the MD, the sales director of Dennis Specialist Vehicles, and they said, this is a special introductory offer for you only, David, never to be repeated, 20% off. Thank you very much. Clive, sign there, please. And he did. So off we went. And first route we converted, the R70, the old 270, a very passenger-unfriendly frequency. We put minibuses on it and run it every 10 minutes, and we got so many people that we had to increase it to every 7 to 8 minutes, and then we had so many people we had to increase it to 6, and then we had so many people we had to put double-deck dupes on. It was a wonderful success story. The passenger numbers went up by a factor of 4, multiplied 4 times, 300% increase in passengers without any discernible abstraction from parallel routes. Really good story. And London United's patch was pretty ripe for that sort of development. High frequency was obviously the way to go for loads of the area around the western fringes of London. So off we went. We did this is Hounslow Depot. Don't ask me why we had the pipes and something to do with the Derek Lott, the depot manager. London United, we inherited Airbus, which is completely commercial, separate from any grant, which gave us a problem, but not that we needed subsidy, but we couldn't get any money authorised for it because it was outside the block grant. I assume you all know that, and if you don't, it doesn't matter. It was increasingly successful until Heathrow Express came along. But I'm not going to talk about the operation of Airbus. I'm just going to tell you one story about Airbus that was the most spectacular non-event of my career. It involves an Airbus that was driving along the M4 elevated section, and as the driver approached towards the Chiswick Road flyover, he realised something was wrong because his offside rear wheel assembly overtook him. Not kidding, 2 double wheels and a hub reduction gear side. It overtook him. And it followed, the wheel assembly followed the white line between the 2 running lanes. And after it sort of dropped down to grade, after the flyover, the wheel assembly floated across the near side lane, floated across the on slip, which had nothing on it, and came to rest in the grass verge. Meanwhile, the bus, because, as most of you will know, there's a long, slow, gentle right-handed bend approaching the flyer, so the bus was leaning out. The airbags on the suspension at the back, therefore, filled up. And the great big H-frame that's supporting the engine, the gearbox, the axles, the wheels, everything, gradually was pushed down to the ground and dragged the bus to a halt in a straight line. It's just incredible. I got the call about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Gov, are you sitting down? Stood up, what? So I was told the story and I thought, oh dear. The potential for that to go wrong, you know, the wheel assembly just stayed on the white. It didn't bounce all over the place, didn't go onto the other carriageway, didn't hit anything, didn't go off the bus didn't fall off the flyover. There was nobody on board. It was running empty from Heathrow back to garage. You know, I actually, at the end of the conversation, I put the phone down, I looked up, I said, thank you. I really meant it. Having determined that we hadn't actually killed anybody or broken anything really seriously badly, we then had to recover the vehicle. How do you do that on a flyover? Well, what you have to do is you have to close the motorway and you have to close the A4 underneath it so that you can push a tow truck the wrong way up the entrance slip at the previous junction at Lionel Road, along the flyover, the elevated section, pick the bus up and drag it the wrong way along the eastbound carriageway, down the entrance slip road, and do a U-turn on the A4 and tow it back to Stamford Brook Garage. And, well, having realised that we hadn't killed anybody, I thought, what's this going to look like in the press? This is, you know, major disaster. One report on Capital Radio, the M4 is closed eastbound due to a broken down bus. And that was it. Gee whiz, talk about lucky or something. Discussion of bus services in London would be very incomplete without mentioning tendering of bus services. That, of course, led to major cost reductions and, I have to say in passing, not a little disruption to staff at the time. This is a photo of a big tender win, the 237s, new buses running from a new tendered garage. We did that by taking all the work in one garage and moving it to other garages, and the staff went with the work. So we could put this new work, new schedules, new labour agreement with all new staff. We rolled that sort of theory forwards as time went on. So we didn't actually hurt anybody, or at least not really badly. Okay, they had to work in a different garage maybe. That was a bit inconvenient. But until the big block grant buyout, which many of you will remember, we didn't do anything compulsorily, which I was quite pleased to have managed. That now leads us on to franchising. Barry, what do you want me to do? Keep going?
Roll on.
Roll on. I was a member of the Quality Contracts Board, which reviewed Tyne and Wear Nexus's proposals for a quality contract in Tyne and Wear. And so what follows is what I gleaned from the proposal and the great big investigation into it that went on, and maybe a few thoughts since then. It's topical because lots of people are talking about franchising bus services, why it's a good thing. I'm not going to talk about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just going to talk about things what you need to think about if you're going to franchise your bus services. So this is really addressed to any transport authority that thinks franchising would be a good idea. First of all, it's not franchising. You can't really do a proper franchise. The transport authority really needs to take all the revenue, and therefore what we're talking about is contracting out. That's what we've got in London. Everybody says franchising like London. It's not. It's contracting out. And there's good reasons for that. And it would be really difficult to run a truly franchised bus operation in a complex urban network. First thing you need is money. And it has to be revenue support and committed long term. Not just talking about capital expenditure. The Transport Authority is going to take the revenue risk on bus services that are not commercial. The bus network will have to be subsidised, by definition. The Transport Authority is going to do all the things that it senses the market is not able to provide, but it wants. Little sub-note, there's no fat profits in the bus industry that can be switched to cross-subsidy. People are a bit self-deluded about that. That's just a side point. If you're going to have contracts, you need to pay contract fees. You're going to have to do that every single month. You need to make sure that there's enough money coming in from the fare box and your subsidy to pay your bills. And because you're committed contractually, there's no easy way out of, oh dear, we're a bit short of money this budget year, we'll have to cut the budgets. You're contractually committed. Next, you need people. People who know the public transport business inside out, highly competent at running it, but who at the same time can work productively with politicians and political realities at all levels. The aspiration for franchising is to replicate the success of London's bus network. But remember, for well over a century, London has been led successively by several people who have been at the very top of the competence tree, and it shows. London has a strong legacy of sound leadership as the transport network has evolved, and that's not the case anywhere else. A more recent leader, in less conventional attire, people who know the business and they've really got a feel for it. That's the sort of people that you need to be advising politicians on what's possible and what's not possible and what will work and how much it will cost and all the rest of it. You also need not only people at the top, you need support staff, particularly competent service planners and schedules compilers, and enough of them. They will have to carry out all the evaluative work through many iterations of all manner of proposals. People are going to want all sorts of different things doing. What's going to work? How's it going to work? What's it going to cost? You need planners and schedules compilers to be able to advise you on that. This was my fine team at London United. Very clever originators of all the minibus schemes that we did there. Clever people, know what they're doing. This is what the Nexus quality contract report had to say about such expertise. I cannot I cannot stress how important such people are, and they must have local knowledge. You need to know where the buses go and why you can't turn a bus from left to right along that road. You'll also need staff for operational control, procurement, contract compliance, performance monitoring, technical development such as passenger information, open source, data, apps, ticketless travel, multimodal traffic, vehicle location. All of that stuff needs to be done by the Transport Authority. And you need good, competent people to do it. You can't do it on the cheap. Think through all of the detail. Ooh, the list of bullet points has gone a bit wonky. Sorry about that. Who is going to do how much of that is something that needs to be thought through if you're going to franchise bus services in a big urban area. We've got to do something about that sort of a problem. Managing the highway will be vital for the Transport Authority. This is just as an example. Any contracting proposal should incorporate absolute commitments to bus priority. Otherwise, changing who's in charge of the buses isn't going to make any difference at all. There's actually a good argument, there should be a good argument for franchising with this. It should be in the interests of the public sector to have control of the bus services and the highway, because fixing the highway and making bus services more profitable, better, and all the rest of it has a direct financial benefit to the Public Transport Authority. Unfortunately, very often the Public Transport Authority is over here and the Highway Authority is a district council over here. And you get silos and not invented here mentality. I've seen it. Others will have seen the same thing. Must have service planning guidelines. Please don't try to read it all. Just note that's what it does about what the network should be doing. You can't just make things up as you go along. There'll be competing claims for additional services, changes to routes. Let's have a fast route. No, let's make it go around a housing estate. All of those mutually exclusive demands for bus services, there must be a way of evaluating it against objective criteria. And there must be a clear strategy and the policies and the procedures to support that in place to link bus service planning with town planning. Be a really nifty idea if you built your new hospital where there's already bus services, for example. Ticketing integrated with other operators and other modes is a common aspiration for franchising, so that there's no fares penalty. It doesn't matter whether you get a bus or a bus and a train and all that. It doesn't make any difference. Like here in London, it's zonal. It's blind to what mode of transport you use. Now that requires revenue to be apportioned, and for the various portions of the overall journey to be paid for at less than the commercial fare. We can go into why and how that happens when we've a bit more time if you want to go into the detail to justify that statement. There are 3 methods for apportioning fares, each with very different results between modes. Which one you're going to choose is the question. And you need to know why, and you need to know how the different apportionment methods actually work. Who's going to manage all of this massive external changes that are going on around bus service, around society in general? This is another extract from the QCS report, and I'll just read it out while you look at all those things. Nexus will need to mitigate obsolescence or take advantage of developments in IT, such as contactless bank card payments, Uber, Google, journey planning, mobility as a service, driverless cars on demand, etc. Yet doing so within a contractual framework confined to a deliberately slow change process and with no spare money will be a challenge. Tension between the stability of the network and the changing circumstance will need a careful balance struck in the contractual relationship between the authority and its operators. These are just a few of the contractual relationships that need very precise definition and understanding. It's all about where is the risk going to lie. And sadly, several of these were completely at large in Tyne and Wear, totally undefined in one case. Another unresolved question was the legal challenge. The Transport Authority is saying to a bus operator, that's not your business anymore, it's ours. I'll let you tender to run it, but the revenue's mine. Now, the potential for a successful legal challenge is probably much less now that we have two pieces of primary legislation that enable franchising of bus services, but that's not to say that the legal challenge won't arise. It was always in the background for Tyne and Wear, and lawyers don't come cheap. And even NASA agreed to pay, offered to pay for the Suez Canal. He just didn't just take it. Another little extract, I'll let you read it. Proposals should be subject to a stage independent review, a common sense review, not an exhaustive economic evaluation. Don't get a consultants in, they'll just tell you, you need more consultancy. Just have a few informed external people to say, does this make sense? During public consultation, don't leave yourself any hostages to fortune. Don't say, no, it'll be okay, we won't do this, we will do that, blah, blah, blah. No, you're going to tie yourself up in knots. Just ask people what they think and then come out with a final proposal. Be careful with these things. What's going to happen to a bus that comes from outside the area, inside the area? Open question. What happens inside the area? Whose fares? Whose money? How do you control it? Needs to be thought about. And how do we get from where we are now, free open market, to where we're going to be in the future, where there's going to be a public transport authority who is going to be in charge of everything? How do we get from one to the other? What's the transition? Do you have a freeze? And, it needs sorting out. I'm not sure I've got the answer to that. Well, I probably have actually, but I'm not going to bother talking about it just now because time's moving on. Franchising, get all this stuff right, and you might have a fully integrated transport system. This is in Switzerland, Spiez, I think. Buses meet the trains every hour, and they shuttle from the train station down to the ferry port, which is only about a mile away, but it's a bit too far, and it makes a connection. Every single train, every single ferry for about 6 hours. It just gives people confidence that no matter what they want to do, something's there to get them to where they want to go to. And finally, we're at the end, you'll be happy to know. Can't resist one more, a happy chappy at the wheel. That was the first Imber bus back in 2009. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, David, very much.
We leave it up.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we've got time for some comment, some questions. You've got a whole raft of stuff to pick on there, the sort of early, lighter stuff, the latter, rather more serious stuff about where we are today with possibly extending the London franchising model to other cities. Who wants to rise to the question challenge?
Deathly hush.
Deathly hush. John, right at the back. Just, if you would wait for the mics to come to you, because although you may think you can be heard, if someone's sitting behind you, they probably can't hear you.
Thanks, David. I hadn't quite realised...
Don't think the mic's on, John?
Thanks, David. I think that was an excellent talk, and I hadn't realised we had quite as much overlap, because I look at our time in West Yorkshire, and I see now that what was West Riding and is now largely Blazefield is still one of the best companies around. If I may, a couple of comments. I agree entirely with what you say about franchising, although at the time that the 1968 Act was going through, sorry, 1985 Act was going through, I was seconded to work with the parliamentary team on the Labour side, and of course we had unlikely bedfellows with the National Bus Company as well as the municipalised operators. And the Department for Transport at that time actually wrote a document called The Problems with Franchising to overcome the appeal of what was described as franchising to certain politicians. I was interested too that you illustrated Bristol. As a consultant, I recommended that if the City Council really wanted to go down the franchising route, they should do it as a trial with the Metrobus routes. I think they may have come away from that now. Well, in fact, I know the Metrobus routes aren't franchised. Can you tell us, in terms of London United, how much of a transition there was in privatisation to the central planning of routes within London Transport TfL?
Yeah. Most of London, well, all of London up until about 1985, before tendering started, was one big network, and it was all planned centrally, and some of it was devolved out to the districts. Then when tendering came along, of course, there were two separate boxes in which planning was done, and it had to be that way for the contractual reasons. When the companies were set up, we were actually devolved to us a little bit more of central planning than had been devolved to the districts. We were responsible for example, liaison with the local boroughs, and so far as the block grant services were concerned, we could do quite a bit. And as you saw, we did. We converted loads of the routes to minibus operation. That was done by agreement with the central planning, but all the impetus came from the companies. And that was replicated right throughout the London bus companies once London Buses was separated out into the 11 main subsidiary companies. Tendered services, of course, were still then planned by the tendered bus unit, almost like a sort of a separate almost like a separate company, a virtual company, insofar as planning of the bus services were concerned. On privatisation, those services that were still in the old block grant were converted into net cost contracts. But, of course, the companies who were privatised could no longer carry out the central planning functions, like notably formal borough liaison. You could still chat to them, of course, and talk about things that might be good ideas, but you couldn't do any of the formal stuff, and the companies had no more authority on planning, but could still do quite a bit of persuasion. Finally, the net cost contracts were rolled into gross cost contracts, where there was actually no real incentive or reason for the various companies to do their own service planning, because there was no revenue to be had. You would just, there's your timetable, do as you're told, and we'll pay you for it. So that's how it ended up. So by, I think, 1999, I think all of the net cost contracts had been tendered out as gross cost contracts. So it evolved over a period of about 14, 15 years. Who's next?
Anybody else? Richard at the back. Could you just check the top switch is on as well as the bottom one? Yep. Lovely.
Thanks for a very interesting talk. Coming back to the thorny subject of franchising, I particularly appreciate your comments on the potential for a legal challenge, because I think the difficulty is that bus operators have invested money in marketing, in perhaps running unremunerative services to build them up, and arguably they've got goodwill in those routes. And now, if we went to a franchising system, that is what the local authority, the transport authority, would actually be stealing, effectively. And I think there's at least one PLC group that will challenge that, and in a way I'd welcome that. I think it's slightly mischievous for people to say, let's go to the London system, because London never sold the routes off in the first place. But I spent a little while reading the Manchester consultation document over the last couple of weeks. It's a bit tedious, and you can't read it all in one go.
You should get a life, you know.
Well, I do try it. Do you think that there's any signs in that Manchester have learnt any lessons from what Tyne and Wear would have got wrong had they gone ahead? And do you think the Manchester scheme might be any more viable, or is it just as fundamentally flawed?
I don't know, to be honest. I haven't done what you've done and read the Manchester 100 and odd pages of the Manchester thing, so I don't know. You know, if somebody at Manchester says, David, can you have a look at this? I'd be happy to do so. But I'm sorry, I'm not competent to answer your question.
Okay, that's fair comment. It is a very tedious document to read, but it has exactly the same things that you've mentioned earlier, like saying, oh, well, if the revenue doesn't come, we could always cut some of the contracts, and ignoring the fact that, well, yeah, once you've signed a contract, you're committed to it.
Yeah.
Could I turn it around and ask a completely different question while I've got the mic? You've worked in a lot of different environments under a lot of different regimes.
Yeah.
Is there one job that you've had that stood out as really the most enjoyable and the top job in your career? Or is there not just one?
Gosh, that's difficult, actually, because I've thoroughly enjoyed most of the jobs I've done. Traffic manager at Hampshire Bus was really fun. I'll extend your question. What environment for running buses, what regulatory environment might be good? And I think the country got it right with the 1981 Act for road service licensing. It changed the burden of proof so that the assumption was that if you wanted to run a bus service, you would be granted a license to do so unless somebody came along and said, no, there's a really good reason why that's a bad idea. And that's the regime that was in place when I joined Hampshire Bus, and I took the company into deregulation. I'd like to think I did a fairly good job of it. But that licensing era was really quite good because there was competition potentially, but it would be controlled. So if it came in, you know, you should have been smarter on your toes. London United, of course, I loved it. It's great. It was my company. You know, yeah. No, I can't choose. I loved all the jobs I did.
Thank you.
Could I ask you, David, to say a little bit more about Airbus? You sort of said it was inevitable. I think you were suggesting that it would fail when the high-speed rail service, Heathrow Express, came on. But it survived Piccadilly line competition, and you'd think sort of at the bottom end, the lower end of the market, maybe it could have survived the Heathrow Express. Is it not possible to run a commercial bus service linking an airport with the city centre, even if there is a rail link or two?
Mostly no. If you think about yourself, if you go to take a plane to somewhere you've never been before and you land in the airport and you know it's a long way from the city centre, and you see there's a railway link, you think, right, that'll do.
But the advantage, I think, is and Airbus met it to a degree, is the bus will probably take you closer to where you're staying, where you're going to be in the city. You haven't got the added challenge of how do I get from Paddington to Bloomsbury or wherever you're staying.
There were a few reasons that people chose Airbus. One was a lot of Americans chose Airbus because underground equals New York subway equals don't go there. And of course the New York subway has now changed, and a lot more Americans are a lot more used to mass transit because over the last 20, 30 years they've had lots of new systems built. So that's kind of gone. There were always far more people travelling from Heathrow to the city centre than we took back out. That means they got in, they found out where everything was in the city and how to get around the place, and they bought a travel card and they said, oh, I can use this to go to Heathrow, and that's what I'll do then. And of course, that was another thing, actually. Airbus was outside of the travel card pot. It was purely commercial. So the fares were usually twice on Airbus what they were on the tube. £3 on the tube, and it was £6 on Airbus. You know, you really struggle. And then the high-speed rail comes along. High-speed rail, well, you know what I mean. Heathrow Express. And of course, the Heathrow Airport Limited had a huge vested interest in making a success of it. So you can't walk around Heathrow Airport without seeing massive adverts for Heathrow Express. And they actually, as much as they could, they pushed Airbus adverts out of the way. Could never really prove it, and they never really, you know, we felt like going to the Competition Commission, but bottled it because we thought, well, probably not going to work. So, yeah, various reasons it didn't work, and the passenger numbers fell away once the Heathrow Express started running. And then it was added to by the local stopping service, and now the Elizabeth line's going to go out there. So, yeah.
I'll add as an aside, as we do have a former Airbus manager in the audience, that we have persuaded John Catley to share some stories of Airbus with us, I think, at a meeting next year, John, at ACT.
Actually, the reason it didn't
He's
work
not
is his
terribly
fault.
enthusiastic.
He was in charge. He made a complete cat's up of it.
You used to get 4 types of letters from David, depending what mood he was in and what you'd done right or wrong. It would start off with David Humphrey, and then it got to David, and then you got best regards, David, and in the end you knew you were in the good books because it just said D.
That meant dunce.
Right. Anybody else with a comment or suggestion? Right.
Hello. You made a brief mention of dial-a-ride services earlier on, and then you made somewhat obliquely a comment about, if you like, the modern incarnation of such a service, web-based, I presume you meant, which I think you said had its challenges. I think that was the word you used, I'm not sure, but words to that effect anyway. Would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. What I meant was that now that there's lots more communication, modern technology, it makes the job much easier to run a dial-a-ride type of service. It really was pen and pencil stuff with us, whereas now if you've got vehicle location, you know where everything is, you know, Uber does it, you just need the critical mass of people who don't want to use a bus service or a train or anything, and they do want a bus. They're happy to share a vehicle, as long as there's not too many other people they're sharing with and there's not too many stops, and you've got the conflict between the number of pickups and getting people straight to where they want to be. It's difficult, but it's worth having a go, and some people look as though they're making a bit of a success of it. So we wish them well, because today's youngsters, there aren't any of those here in the... I want to go here. There's my phone, I press a button and something turns up. I don't care what it is, I want it to take me where I want to go. I don't want to part with money, I want to press a button and that'll take care of the money. That's where the market is, that's what we have to cater for.
Okay, anybody else?
Left them all astounded, speechless.
Right. Well, I think probably given us something to think about, David. I'll come back to that in a moment. So just to wrap up from me, this is the first time I'm going to say it, but I guess I've got to say it because we're not meeting until Christmas. I do wish you, your family and friends a very happy Christmas. We'll see you again if you come out in the frosty Sunday of the 22nd of December for our run to Croydon on FRM1, but otherwise we're back here in the new year in January for Christian Warmar. Thank you, David, very much for a sort of presentation in two parts, but a fascinating presentation in two parts. I guess we all love the stories of some of the things you got up to in your earlier parts of your career in the snow and elsewhere. But thank you, I think, for adding on to that the quite thoughtful piece that followed, because I suspect we'll be going home just mulling over in my mind. I must admit, I haven't quite come to a conclusion, because reading between the lines, I think you were very sceptical in your approach to what might happen here in the UK. But then, of course, at the very end, you show us that lovely photograph of a Swiss post bus waiting for all its connections. So, which is better? Which do we like? You've given us something to think about, as well as giving us something to enjoy. So thank you very much for that. And I'd ask you to express your appreciation in the usual way. Thank you. Travel safely home, and we'll see you in the new year.